If you guys have ever wanted to try the Fire Emblem series, honestly you're about to make a very big mistake, but I'll be more than glad to give you a guide through all that. It's very unlikely to not know about the Fire Emblem series. For the last 6 years or so, it has acquired an enormous following. It's very likely you got to know the games because of Smash Bros, and probably that made you get some interest in the series. But then you do some research and realize that the series has over 15 games, with a new entry coming out later this year. Oh god, just please don't fuck up. So what's the best one to start with? That's exactly what we're going to look at in this video. We're looking at all the mainline Fire Emblem games and see which ones are the best for newcomers. So let's begin. The one that began everything. Released on 1990 on the Famicom. For those who know next to nothing about the series, here's a quick rundown. Fire Emblem is all about taking turns to lead your army in order to accomplish certain objective. All the units are their own character and all of them have unique strengths and weaknesses that become more apparent as they level up. They do also have access to different classes that lets them fill specific roles and wield certain weapons. These weapons have durability and can break after they've been used enough. If any of your units falls in battle, that's it, they never come back. Or in case of the protagonist, if they die, it's instant game over. But still, throughout the adventure you can recruit more allies who have their own reasons to help you in your cause. Those basic fundamentals are introduced here, but because it is the first game in the series, it's only natural that this one is the most archaic one. For example, the weapon triangle that became such a staple in the series is nowhere to be seen. Healers cannot gain experience by healing. Something as simple as the movement range falls on the player's account, as there are no color tiles to tell you how far a unit can move. The speed of the game is slow, of course, given the console we are talking about. Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light is by no means a bad game, but it takes a certain mind to enjoy something this old, as some players might end up finding this game frustrating due to its limitations, and those comments also translate into the side sequel Fire Emblem Gaiden. But even if that is true, Gaiden also improves on its predecessor by giving the player more toys to play with. Some units have branching promotion trees, meaning the player can promote them into any class they desire. There's an overworld map that grants access to towns and cave exploration. Mages learn spells as they level up, and weapons do not break in this game. Even if it's on the Famicom like its predecessor, it has enough for it to feel like a totally different game. The dumbest thing about it, however, is that it introduced a lot of interesting mechanics that will be abandoned or will be revisited very later on. Now we jump into the Super Famicom, starting with Fire Emblem Mystery of the Emblem, where we are greeted by the return of Mort and his new pants. This game split into 2 books, the second one being a direct sequel to Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light, but the first one is some sort of a bridge remake of said game. With a more powerful console in hand, Fire Emblem 3 carries certain mechanics from the Famicom, fixes some of the issues but also improves in other elements. The game now tells you how far a unit can move, which is always convenient to know. New features include cavalier units being able to dismount their horses in order to wield different weapons, and obviously there is a noticeable graphical improvement and some new story elements to add more flavor text. But just like I mentioned a few moments ago, it also drops some mechanics from Gaiden. No world map, no branching promotion trees, this one is more on point with the first game. That last one is not a negative comment, mind you, and since it's 2 games in one, it wouldn't make a bad starting point, but for reasons I'll comment on later, there's just better choices. Now we finally let Mart rest for a while until his inevitable announcement in Melee, but for now, let's go to the continent of Yggdrasil, home of the Holy Knight Sigurd, the protagonist of Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War. That name is appropriate because holy shit! I'll start by saying that this game is not a good starting point at all. Not because I think it is a bad game, on the contrary, I think it's fantastic. But this one is definitely not welcoming any newbies. Just to give you an idea of that, take a look at the first map of the game. Oh my god, it's still going. This game only has 12 chapters. It doesn't sound like much, but every single one is like 3 different chapters. The objective of each one is always to conquer specific castles. Once you do that, a new story event triggers that forces you to go to a completely new one or defend your main base before it's too late. Genealogy is a game that requires a ton of patience, careful planning, a few miracles, and full knowledge of how the mechanics work, both old and new. Genealogy was the first game to introduce the weapon triangle, but there's more than that. There's a matter of defending your bases from the enemy because if the main one falls, it's game over. Your castles also serve as everything else: storage, general store, armory, a coliseum to train your units. There's also the introduction of special skills that come with certain classes or characters. Some of them are outright broken, but with a game that asks this much from the player, they're more than welcome. But the feature that should take prominence over them all is the relationship system. The game is split in 2 generations. In Generation 1 you can make your units fall in love with each other, and come Generation 2 you will now take control of their children. This is more than just a silly mechanic to debate what romantic ship is better. Depending on which characters you pair up, their children will also inherit their special skills, some of their weapons, and will also get different base stats and growths. I repeat, Genealogy is not at all for newcomers. This is a game that asks more from your average player, and this is not something anyone can find enjoyment in. And apparently Intelligent Systems thought that wasn't enough and then they released Erasure 776. No! If this was a no for newcomers, then this is a severe no, in all caps. Theracia is arguably the hardest game in the entire series. The fact that the enemy units are stronger than they were in Genealogy is one thing, but this one can overwhelm any player with its mechanics, capturing that lets you defeat an enemy without killing them so you can take out their belongings, fog of war chapters that limit your vision on the maps, a fatigue system that prevents you from abusing from your most powerful units, guidance chapters that can be accessed by fulfilling specific conditions, escape chapters where you're severely outnumbered and must retreat before it's too late. Reinhardt. Freaking Reinhardt.
Magic is everything.
Theracia is not at all a game welcoming newcomers. Even veterans can struggle with this one, so if you can beat this game, consider yourself a Fire Emblem master. Now at this point the series decided to skip the Nintendo 64 and jump straight into the Game Boy Advance with Fire Emblem The Binding Blade featuring Roy. Our boy.
Roy's our boy!
So, at the 6th entry in the series, most of the mechanics have already taken shape and became staples, and Binding Blade has most of them. Weapon Triangle, a few Fog of War chapters, recruitment, supports, colosseums, almost everything is here, but not as overwhelming as Theracia. Not by a mile. So does that make it a good starting point? No. The mechanics are fine and dandy, but this game suffers from quite a few problems. The first one being that Roy is arguably the worst protagonist in the series gameplay-wise. He's so bad, but so bad, that this game is mostly about babysitting him, and just when he has the opportunity to shine, it's already too late to enjoy him. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Binding Blade has some really challenging maps for all the wrong reasons. They are really punishing. The grand majority of them drag for too long and the enemy placement is straight up bullshit. Nothing hurts more than restarting a chapter because a sudden reinforcement attacked you on the same turn it appeared, or because one of your units fell under a status condition. Ask any Fire Emblem fan what's the worst chapter in the series and they'll most likely answer with Arcadia. But the worst part is that this game expects you to replay it. There's multiple endings and with certain conditions you can make a fifth of the game change in its entirety, giving you access to totally different characters and story elements. Even with the negative comments I made, there's stuff that can really be enjoyed here, but as it stands now, Binding Blade is not really a good entry point for newcomers. However, the next game... Yes! Fire Emblem The Blazing Blade. I prefer to just call it Fire Emblem 7. This is the first one that saw release outside of Japan, so it was designed specifically to appeal to new players. This is done by splitting it in 3 campaigns. Every player begins with Link's story. This is pretty much the tutorial. It's a simple story that does a great job to explain the player the basics. Movement, different classes, trading, weapon triangle, promoting characters, using the terrain to your advantage, the consequences of permadeath. Link's story does its job, but the rest of the game is simply fantastic. Unlike Binding Blade, the maps are way smaller and better designed. The difficulty is challenging but fair, and the game is always willing to reward you the better you get at it. There's nothing really new in terms of gameplay mechanics, but this one is simply superior because it's more balanced, more fun, it has tons of replay value, and the cast has so much personality, and because of that, this one is simply a great entry point for newcomers. Also Hector, he's my favorite video game character. Now we go to the last GBA game, Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones, and there's not really much I can add to this one, because at its core it has the same gameplay as Fire Emblem 7. Okay, yes, there's a new setting with new lovable characters, a few new classes, and the story is divided in 2 paths that completely change the chapters and also have a few differences in story elements. Sacred Stones also saw the introduction of a world map and the branching promotion classes to give you more liberty in how you want to build your units. There's also a tower that lets you level up your units whenever you want, making this game very easy to break. Actually, even without it, Sacred Stones is arguably one of the easiest games in the franchise. That's not a bad thing, mind you, because the game's still very enjoyable and it even makes a decent starting point. Personally, I'll recommend 7 a little bit more, but Sacred Stones is also a good candidate. Now we move on to the GameCube with another familiar face. Fighting for his friends comes Ike, the main character of Fire Emblem Path of Radiance, also known as Fire Emblem. Oh my god, what the fuck are these prices? Path of Radiance, again, gives the core gameplay that at this point has already been defined. The most important feature revolves around a whole new race known as the Lagoos, a breed of humanoid creatures that can shapeshift into animals. It can be a beast, a bird, a dragon, and all of them come with extraordinary power. These guys cannot be abused because they do have a transformation bar that depletes depending on their actions. In their human form, they are extremely vulnerable, but their existence is enough to give a whole new spin to your strategies. Even if you take the Lagoos out of consideration, Path of Radiance also refines on so many areas. The skill system is back and is more versatile. Leveling certain units is less tedious because of the bonus experience feature. You can forge your own weapons, and your main base allows for better management. You can also have some insight of your previous battles, tips for the next ones, and you can also delve deeper into the support conversations that your characters can have. Path of Radiance is simply an extraordinary game, and even if it costs you an organ donation, it's totally worth it. But I don't think it's a good starting point for newcomers because, while the game is fair in its challenge, it also expects you to have some previous experience with the series, and I really advise that because the better you are at this game, the more you get out of it. And I can say the same about its fantastic sequel Radiant Down. No! Not at all is this a good game for newcomers, not because it is a direct sequel, but also because it's harder and brings new mechanics. Units can now go even further beyond and acquire a tier 3 class with higher stats, more weapon mastery, and exclusive skills, and even the Lagoos got a few upgrades. But what makes this game so punishing is its structure. I'll put it simple. The game is split in parts who are split into chapters. In part 1 you control an army known as the Down Brigade, but then on part 2 you control another completely different army. Take in mind that the difficulty escalates accordingly as you progress, so by the time the Down Brigade comes back, a good chunk of them will become obsolete, putting the player in a lot of predicaments. So you really need that previous experience in order to overcome those flaws and get the best out of this game, because trust me, the entirety of Telius is fantastic. Now we jump onto the Nintendo DS to give Mart one last visit with another remake of Shadow Dragon and the Japan exclusive remake of Mystery of the Emblem. I already made a video on these two games when I was still very new to this, so I'll just keep it simple. Shadow Dragon is the most vanilla you can play Fire Emblem without feeling too old. The game is simplicity at its core, and you know what? That makes it a very good starting point for newcomers. It does its job in being a Fire Emblem game, but when you take into account that it's a remake, it could have done more to make the continent of Arcania more interesting. New Mystery, however, does that. It got the optional casual mode in order to remove permadeath and appeal to newcomers, but it also introduced a playable avatar character that the player can customize however they want, and the avatar comes with its own side story. And at least New Mystery does an effort to give more personality to the cast, which is something I really appreciate. Out of these two, I think both of them do a great job in being good entry points. I believe Shadow Dragon might be the most preferable choice because of how easy it is to pick up and play, and also because of story continuity. But if you don't care about that, New Mystery is also a solid candidate. Here we are, one of the most controversial games in the series, but honestly, who the fuck cares anymore? This game, like most people, is the one that got me to the series. To put it simple, Awakening was supposed to be the last Fire Emblem game, so the developers put as many mechanics as they could. The children system from Genealogy, the beast units from Telius, a playable avatar and casual mode from New Mystery, the branching promotion trees from Gaiden, and reclassing from Shadow Dragon. Its new thing is the pair-up system where two units become one in order to acquire stat bonuses and occasional help in battle. But it's so easy to abuse of it, and honestly Awakening is one of the easiest games in the franchise, because of how quick you can build broken units. Awakening does a lot, but it doesn't particularly excel on anything. But even so, this game is perfect for newcomers. It's not punishing at all in its normal difficulty, but because of how much there is on it, the player can spend hours and hours experimenting with all there is to do. The biggest drawback is that it spoils you a lot, more than it should, and it can give a false idea of how the past games in the series play. But you know what? It has a charm that made all of us buy it in order to save the franchise. But was that really a good thing? Next on the list we got Fire Emblem Fates. This is quite an unusual game. Just like Awakening, it tried to do a little of everything, but at the same time it's also split in three completely different versions: Birthright, Conquest, and Revelations, and they all try to appeal to different audiences. Birthright wanted to appeal to the more casual fans, a more pleasing experience, an easier way to level up your units, and more liberty to build their relationships. But then Conquest wanted to appeal to hardcore fans, stronger enemies, less room for error, and a different gimmick in almost every map. But then Revelations tried to be a combination of the two, but ended up having the slowest and most tedious maps in the series. I can give the gameplay credit because it's honestly very enjoyable. The pair-up mechanic has been reworked to be more balanced, there's a new weapon triangle and an overwhelming amount of new classes. Some folks might even enjoy the optional stuff like building their own castle. So if I look at this from an objective point, Revelations is not really a good entry point since it's the canonical road that you're supposed to play after you beat the other two games. Birthright and Conquest can potentially be decent entry points, but I just think Awakening overall does a much better job. We are finally at the end of the line with Fire Emblem Shadows of Palencia, a remake of the Japan exclusive Gaiden. This game is pretty much what Shadow Dragon should have been, a remake that truly improves what the game is based on rather than giving it a new coat of paint. This game shines for having its own identity. While the core gameplay remains the same, it's what complements it, what makes Shadows of Palencia special. It retains the unique features from Gaiden and expands on them while also adding more. All of that while having a story full of really interesting and lovable characters. And Celica. And Faye. While it takes some deviations from what players are used to, Shadows of Palencia's mechanics are nothing complicated, so this is a game that welcomes any newcomer willing to start with it. So with that we can conclude that
Fire Emblem! Heroes!
Okay, one more game. Fire Emblem Heroes is a mobile game where you can summon multiple characters throughout the series to aid you in battle. Everything is condensed into very small maps that don't take too long to finish, but have the benefit of being really addictive. The gameplay is very simple and easy to understand, but with different skills and the constant updates the game still receives to this day, it can even acquire some depth. I know of a few friends who got into the series because of this game. You can get attached to a character and think, wow, I should play this guy's game, he seems like a very interesting character. Pieces of shit! So yes, because this game is a celebration of the entire series, it does a decent job in pushing you to try the other games. But there's two important things I have to point out. If you're a person who cares about spoilers, then you might want to start with the other game. We have reached the point where the developers just don't care anymore, and a unit's existence can spoil you an important plot point from another game. But most importantly, if you end up starting with Heroes, do not forget that at the end of the day this is still a gacha game. Not getting the character you want is really heartbreaking, but spending real money for another chance... not worth it. Okay, so that was for real the last of them. So to sum everything up, if I were to tell you what are the best games to start with, I'll say Fire Emblem 7, Awakening, and Shadow Dragon. It all comes down to what do you prefer. Do you want a challenging but fair game? Do you want a lot of variety? Or maybe you'll prefer a very vanilla experience. These three games are what I believe are great for new players, but I also find the likes of Sacred Stones, Shadows of Palencia, New Mystery, and Heroes to do a decent job. So give it a shot. It's always great to explore new horizons, and Fire Emblem just might be something you'll end up loving. And if you do, tell me which one you started with. Until then, thank you guys so much for joining in. I really hope you had an enjoyable time. If you liked this video, I would really appreciate if you could drop those thumbs up and maybe share it with your friends, cause that will help me to grow here. And remember to take care, cause I'll be seeing you next time.